Combat in FF7 Rebirth is very similar to what we saw in FF7 Remake, which once again means that it's a very unique blend of real-time twitch reflex-driven action peppered in with tactical turn-based strategizing. It's a combat system with a ton of nuance and depth to explore, and so to help navigate it, here are 16 essential combat tips. To start, just a quick note that we did a combat guide for FF7 Remake 3 years ago, and almost all of the points in that video still apply here. So I'm just gonna very quickly summarize all of the returning, relevant bits from that video. Never just mash basic attacks mindlessly. Unless you've got a very specific build designed for it, your basic attacks should largely be used to build ATB rather than for raw damage. Number 2, swap your characters often. AI-controlled characters don't build ATB very quickly, so make sure you're swapping between your characters, especially once you initiate a spell or ability, since you can't control them during that time anyway. Number 3, know your roles. Make sure you know what each character is good at and what they're currently built for. Tifa excels at burst damage and building stagger, Aerith at spellcasting, Barret for ranged DPS and fast ATB meter build, etc. Number 4, consider spell charge times. Don't assume that just because you initiate a spell, that spell will go off. Your characters can get interrupted during the spell charge time, and if that happens, you lose the MP and ATB costs of that spell without the spell actually going off. So don't cast spells when you're in an enemy's sights. Number 5, use Assess on new enemies. Assess will show you the key to beating every enemy. Note enemy weaknesses and the text in yellow that will tell you the unique ways in which to stagger or pressure an enemy. After assessing them, you can view this info again by pressing the touchpad. Number 6, remember to block. Blocking is very important in Rebirth's combat. Timing a block perfectly before an attack lands will negate all the damage, but even just holding down the block button is extremely helpful in substantially mitigating damage, building ATB, and potentially also building the stagger meter on certain enemies. Number 7, know your status symbols. If you come across a status symbol you don't know, you should look it up in the game's manual tab. Some things, like Reflect, are especially important to know, as it means that using a spell against that enemy will bounce the spell right back at you. Number 8, unlock your weapon abilities. Whenever you get a new weapon, you should always make sure you unlock the weapon ability of your equipped weapon before you upgrade to the new one. You can do this by building up the proficiency with that ability just by using it and by paying attention to the proficiency bonus. Moves that aren't fully unlocked yet will be marked with a blue circle beside them in the combat menu. Number 9, set shortcuts. Combat will flow much more smoothly when you use shortcuts for your most popular spells and abilities. Try to keep a logic to it between your different characters. Keep abilities meant to stagger on one shortcut, abilities meant for damage on another, maybe a frequently used spell on another, and a spell or ability used for some sort of utility on the last shortcut. Alright, now that we've got those tips out of the way, let's focus on some new Rebirth-focused tips. Dodges are much more important in Rebirth compared to Remake. While Tifa is the only character that can guard cancel, outside of Cloud in his Punisher stance, every character can dodge cancel. So if you want to get out of a string of attacks and switch to defense, use a dodge to cancel the attack's animation and get out of there. Dodges also have some invulnerability frames now as well, making them a great option for getting out of the way of enemies that like to dash towards you. Some enemies will even get pressured if you manage to dodge out of the way of certain attacks. 2 things to note, however. One is that the quality of the dodge differs from character to character. Cloud, Tifa, Yuffie, and especially Red all have excellent dodges that cover a lot of space and are fairly quick. Barret and Aerith, on the other hand, are much slower and cover far less distance. Number 11, know your unique attacks. Another reason to use dodges is that many characters now have unique techniques when they attack right out of a dodge. Cloud, for example, can execute a 3-hit ranged attack combo by mashing attack after a dodge that's especially good at keeping him at a distance and hitting aerial enemies. If you hold the attack button after dodging, you can zip towards the enemy and initiate an air combo. Red can hold down the attack button to go into a spin that hits multiple enemies and builds ATB extremely quickly. Tifa can hold down the attack button to use an uppercut that puts her into the air and allows her to quickly cancel into aerial skills like dive kick. And Aerith has a charge attack called Tempest that, when fully charged, creates a fleeting familiar that attacks automatically and increases the potency of her spells. Number 12, learn each character's nuances. Every character has a unique ability or mechanic tied to the triangle button, and they're all super important to know and make proper use of. So let's go over each of them. For Cloud, pressing triangle will swap his stance from either Operator to Punisher. Operator is what you'll use primarily to maneuver around the battlefield, and Punisher is what you'll want to use when you're up in a non-mobile enemy's face, ready to attack. While in Punisher stance, Cloud will execute a counter every time he guards against an enemy's melee attack, but ranged attacks and magic attacks will still go through the guard. Also note that there's a brief flash when you switch stances, and if you time it so you switch stances just as an enemy attacks you, you'll execute an even more devastating counterattack. Tifa's secondary attack changes depending on how many charges of unbridled strength she has, but the use is always the same, to build up the damage multiplier once an enemy is staggered. At 0 charges, she'll use Rising Uppercut. At 1, she can use Omni Strike, and with 2 charges, she can use Rise and Fall. All of those moves flow right into the other, so the ideal goal is to have 2 charges of Unbridled Strength ready to go once an enemy staggers, then hit them with all 3 of those attacks to increase the damage multiplier as much as you can. Barret's secondary attack is Overcharge, which deals big damage and builds ATB very quickly, but once he uses it, he'll have to recharge his meter. This meter can be recharged more quickly by pressing triangle, but what you really want to do is fire his basic attack until he stops shooting, then press triangle to use a faster recharge animation that fills the gauge even quicker. Aerith's ability allows her to quickly warp to a ward, which is a great way to get Aerith out of danger while also putting her where she's able to do the most damage, on one of her wards. For Red, pressing triangle will initiate his Vengeance mode, which increases his damage and dodge speed. He can enter Vengeance mode at any time, but the length of time in which he can remain in the mode depends on how full his meter is, which is increased by successfully guarding against attacks. Activating Vengeance mode also changes his triangle ability to Siphon Fang, which allows Red to steal some HP from his enemies with a high-powered attack. Yuffie can press triangle to throw her shuriken out, which will then change her regular attack to elemental focus ninjutsu range attacks. You can change what ninjutsu you have equipped by using the ability Elemental Ninjutsu and pressing left or right on the D-pad to select which specific element you want. Once the shuriken is out, you can also zip to it by pressing triangle again. And finally there's Cait Sith, who is so wild and unique that I feel like I need to go over him in a bit more detail. And yes, I'm saying Cait Sith because that's how they say it in the game. Don't come at me. Cait Sith fights with a megaphone that can be used at melee range or at a distance by dashing before attacking, but the real strength of the character comes when you spend a bar of ATB on the Let's Ride ability. This summons his Moogle mount, which deals damage on landing and can be used to not only enhance Cait Sith's damage, but also give him access to several new abilities. The Moogle will attack enemies autonomously, and if you just let it do its work, it will start filling up a meter in the bottom left. Without building up the meter, you can press triangle to use the ability Dropkick, which is just a simple but fairly powerful melee attack. Once you build up a charge, you'll be able to give the whole party a random buff. Either Fight, which grants the party Bravery and Faith, Defense, which grants the party Protect and Shell, or Go Wild, which grants the party Berserk. If you manage to save it up and build 2 charges, Cait Sith will again be granted a random skill, but this time it will be one of 4 attacks that will each inflict a status ailment, either Silent Slam, Stop Strike, Toxic Tackle, or Petrify Piledriver. You can also hop off the mount at any time by pressing circle and do your own thing while the puppet attacks autonomously, building its meter all by itself. Ultimately, Cait Sith's greatest strength is that he can perform spells while the Moogle attacks and build up this powerful meter. The meter also builds even while you're controlling other characters, so when you go back to him, you might just have a level 2 charge built up. The downside is that he can't dodge like the other characters, but he can do a little sidestep if you just flick the left stick in a direction while the Moogle is attacking. Number 13, how to use synergy skills. Synergy skills are a brand new wrinkle on Rebirth's combat, and they can take a little while to fully understand how to properly incorporate them into combat. First off, let's make the important distinction between synergy skills and synergy abilities. Synergy skills are tied to the R1 button and don't require any kind of resource to use, just that both characters involved in the skill are able to participate. Synergy abilities, on the other hand, are flashy techniques that require synergy charges to perform. It can be overwhelming to try to learn every single synergy skill and what they do, and if that's the case for you, a tip is to remember generally that synergy skills on R1 plus square and triangle are meant to be offensive skills, while the ones on R1 plus X and circle are meant to be defensive skills. We'll have a separate video going into more detail about synergy skills, but for now you should know that they are especially important because they build ATB for both characters involved at the same time. Some of them also provide important utility, like Counterfire's ability to completely nullify ranged attacks with a much larger window than trying to perfect block them, on top of the added benefit of also dealing a counterattack. Number 14, don't forget about your synergy abilities. If it wasn't already clear, the developers of Rebirth Combat really want to encourage you to swap between your characters fairly regularly. And to encourage that even further, there are now synergy abilities. These are powerful techniques between pairs of characters that end with some sort of bonus, whether that's granting both characters unlimited MP for a limited time, giving them 3 ATB bar segments instead of 2, raising your limit break levels, or extending the amount of time an enemy is staggered for. To execute synergy abilities, you'll first need to have 2 characters build up enough synergy charges, which is done by using moves marked with this black square symbol that has a black and white rectangle. Using a synergy ability then spends these charges for both characters involved, and every time you use that same synergy ability, it requires more synergy charges to use, encouraging you to use different abilities rather than just focusing on one. Number 15, be comfortable using every character. Every character level's pretty much the same regardless of whether they're in the active party or not, but you should still make sure that you're comfortable with the skill sets and roles of each character, as there will be several moments in the story where your party members will be fixed. Whenever you switch to new characters, always make sure to spend some time in the materia menu and make sure that they're decked out with everything that they'll need to make them a help on the battlefield. And number 16, change up your gear if you hit a wall. Rebirth is a pretty challenging game, and there will no doubt be moments where your current gear loadout is just not a good fit for a particular boss. In cases like that, rather than just immediately trying again after a game over, take some time to consider what materia you have equipped, what the boss is weak to, what characters might be better suited to deal with their weaknesses, and what synergy skills or abilities would work best in the fight. And those are 16 tips to help conquer combat in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Thanks for watching, and for more Rebirth tips, make sure to check out our guide covering general tips that either don't go fully explained or are easy to miss. And for everything else, keep it here on IGN.
See you around.